On the agenda tonight, we're going to be having a listen to Jos Slovick, and he's going to be performing I Am a Poor Wayfaring Stranger. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So this song comes from the movie 1917, and that was released in 2019. But it's an interesting one because it was sent to me with the question, is pitch correction or auto-tune being used? And it's another standalone performance because I don't have to isolate the vocal because it is just a vocal, no instrumentation. So it's going to be an interesting one. So I have run the vocal through the pitch monitoring software and we'll have a listen to it. I am going to be jumping into this, so there's going to be a link in the description below as always if you guys want to watch it the whole way through with the video as well. I'm not going to be showing the video apart from what you can see in the background behind the pitch monitor because of copyrights and all that kind of stuff. It'll probably get blocked, but let's have a listen.
I am a poor wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe. Yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go.
So I'm just going to jump in here because I would suggest that you go and watch the video, have a listen to it, and just hear it the whole way through and see how you feel at the end of the performance. Because if you can't hear auto-tune or pitch correction, how you feel about a performance is usually a good way to judge whether it's being used or not. And when I first heard this, without seeing the notes on screen and just using my ears, I did think that this sounds really precise with the notes that are being sung, but also just the maintenance of the notes. So when Jos is hitting a particular pitch, he's just holding that pitch so accurately. But I still thought that it was a little bit sharp, a little bit flat, and it didn't sound pitch corrected and definitely not auto-tuned. But it didn't feel like it had been manipulated. I mean, when I say that, I mean because at the end of the performance, you're left with a feeling about the performance and you're not really put off by the use of effects and the use of, in this case, or what would have been the case as the person was asking about pitch correction. But we can have a look at this and we can say that pitch correction hasn't been used. And there's only one part that lasts for maybe half a second or maybe a second where I thought, oh, maybe that was pitch correction there. But I think it is so borderline that it might just be Jos's singing voice, and because it's a little bit wobbly, it might have had a processed sound to it, but just because of the way that he happened to deliver it for that, that split second. When we're looking at the accuracy, I know that a lot of people, if you're looking at this and you're quite far away from the screen, you might see things like this and assume that it's, auto-tune or pitch corrected if you don't know the difference between them. I do have a video on the difference on the channel if you want to check that out independently. But as we go forward, again, you can see here that there's almost a straight line there. And then as we go forward, this here, again, a really straight line. But the thing to point out about this, straight off the bat, generally when pitch correction is being used heavily, you'll just see it straight away. But when we start, we can see that we're actually flat of the E3. And generally when a studio is applying pitch correction to a vocalist, they won't let the first note of the performance be off or be flat, but it is here. And I think the reason that this has been allowed to happen, for the whole performance, is because there's no instrumentation that's going to be tuned to 440 Hz tuning, as this pitch monitoring software is calibrated to. So it means that the vocal is your only reference point. And if it sounds accurate to your ear, then that's all that needs to happen. And it might have actually been the case that if they did pitch correct this, because there's no other instruments playing at 440 Hz equal temperament, the vocal sounded more accurate when it wasn't conforming to this 440 Hz tuning, but just by itself it sounds more accurate. And that's certainly the impression that I got when I heard this to begin with. I thought, wow, that is a really accurate vocal. But the thing that I was impressed with was Jos's ability to hold a note with very little deviation. Usually when a vocalist holds a note, they'll apply a vibrato throughout the note, or they'll hold a note and it'll go, a little bit sharp, a little bit flat, then you have vibrato at the end. But here we can see that, we're pretty much dead on the line, but we then go a little bit flat. And this is the giveaway, is that on all of these lines, you see these little, peaks and troughs. You don't get that when it's been snapped to a line, and we've seen it in multiple videos on this channel, where it's literally a yellow line that you can see. So it's like playing a piano. Whereas here, we've got all these tiny variations and they are flat. So even though when you listen to it, it sounds perfect to the ear, there is pitch variation going on in this. It just sounds like it's one note, but it isn't. But this is why we're looking at it in this kind of detail, so that we can find all these tiny parts here. Again, really accurate but slightly flat, really accurate but slightly flat, and then, getting bang on that A3. The thing to point out about this vocal is, I think, in terms of a held note, this is the most accurate we've ever seen, just because of that consistency and there being no vibrato, but just keeping these vocal cords exactly where they are, blowing that air through them and having no real variation in the note when it's held. But because it's not pitch corrected or auto-tuned, it means that we do see variation, but it's minimal. But of course, we get to appreciate, when we're looking at this line here, you can see that we actually go up a little bit. So we start flat, we go up a little bit, and then we come back down, and now we end flat. But this is it, that we get to see it in this kind of detail, and we can make these decisions and deduce from what we're seeing that it's a really accurate voice, but it's not pitch corrected. I'm just going to play this next vocal phrase to put it under the spotlight to show how much this vocal has just been allowed to happen and it hasn't been manipulated.
Sickness, toil, nor danger, in that bright land to which I go.
So right at the end here, again, slightly sharp here, but then coming back down onto that A3, but then going slightly sharp. So tiny details, but this is what, shows you that we are not pitch corrected, because here the E3 is flat. This amount of variation you just don't get when a voice has been manipulated or heavily pitch corrected or auto-tuned, because here it's been allowed to, wobble. And when you listen to it really carefully, actually, let's listen to this in slow motion so that we can hear the little wobbles of pitch that happen just when you're holding a note. So you can start to hear that, especially with the vibrato at the end, of course, but that it sounds like it kind of drifts. But that's the point, that these are just the vocal cords literally vibrating. And this is why this is so impressive, having this kind of control, is because the vocal cords are vibrating, in order to get the note. And you'll get tiny variations of pitch just because of the fact that it's not something that's set in stone. The vocal cords don't just stick there and then you get the noise. They're constantly moving. So you do get this really slight variation in pitch. And, it's one of the things that really helps us to see a natural voice when comparing it to pitch correction or auto-tune, because that is just going to be squashing the voice as if it is just set in stone like a piano. You press the voice effectively and it gives you a straight note, whereas we don't get that here. But we'll listen to it a little bit more.
I'm going there to see my father.
I think it might have been that G3 where we have this father, that onset of father sounded like, I said it was maybe a second in length, but it sounded like it might have been pitch corrected. But given the fact that we can see on all of the other notes that we've got all of these tiny variations, I think looking at it now on the pitch monitoring software, when I listened to that and thought, oh, it could be, by seeing all of the other notes that are being hit in the variation that we get, like here being flat of that B3, for example, I think that that's just the nature of the tone and maybe just part of the recording, that it wasn't, pitch corrected. It wasn't edited in any way. It just happened to sound a little bit like that. But let's continue.
I'm going there, no more to roam.
I love to hear that kind of thing, where it's allowed to go slightly flat. And all of these variations put emotion into the performance. And this is why, when I said about going away and listening to the song, see how you feel at the end of it. Because I guarantee you that you'll be left in a reflective mood, considering what you've just heard. And of course, if you've seen the movie, you'll relate it to the imagery as well. But when you're listening to something that's been heavily processed, you don't have that same emotional reaction. And certainly I don't, because all you can hear is the software just doing its thing, processing the voice, and then just coming up with that final product that just sounds, well overproduced, overprocessed, and sounds mechanical. Whereas this, because of these tiny variations, this is what locks you in emotionally to the performance.
I'm only going over Jordan.
And again, see how flat we are with these two notes, flat, and then we get bang on to the B3, and again we're flat here. But it's not about listening to it and looking at this. It's just about listening to it, because it doesn't sound like anything's wrong with it. But by the time we get to the G3 and the E3, we're now bang on pitch, or at least, we're sounding pitch perfect the whole time, which is the point.
I know dark clouds will gather round me.
And look at that. The amount of variation we have here. We actually started bang on, went sharp, came back down, went flat, and then ended quite a lot sharp. So it's great. I don't know, but hearing singing nowadays, considering that this was only a few years ago, just hearing something that's natural is great, and it makes it stand out. And for me, to my ears, I just like hearing notes that are free to go where they want to go, rather than hearing, every song pretty much nowadays, especially in, the dance charts, stuff you hear on the radio as well, in the mainstream charts, it is so pitch corrected, so auto-tuned, that you don't get this anymore. If this happened on a mainstream pop track, this would definitely not have made the cut, and they would have just flattened this note to that E3. Guaranteed. The amount of variation we have here would not be allowed in today's modern music industry, unfortunately. So this is why it's so rare to hear this. And it's interesting that this being part of the 1917 movie, it's almost as if this has been left as a natural vocal because they want the emotional connection to the footage you're seeing while you're listening to their song. So then you've got to ask yourself the question, at what point did the music industry think that it's now okay or better to lose the emotional connection in place of accuracy or being, or conforming to 440 hertz tuning? So there's definitely been a conscious decision to calibrate a vocal to 440 hertz to this graph rather than allow the emotion of the vocal to come across. Because when it's to do with this movie, and I wonder if they did try and or attempt to pitch correct it to begin with and listen to it and thought, oh no, this is ridiculous because we're losing the connection to the vocal. They might have done that and realized, actually, we just need to let this guy sing because, you know, he is connecting and we are connecting to that natural vocal. So yeah, really interesting to look at the amount of variation we've got, but also to appreciate the level of accuracy we've got here with held notes, because it's mightily impressive.
I know my way is rough and steep.
And again there, we've gone flat on the A3, and then we went sharp, actually, on the B, and this is the B3. You can't see it because that's in the way, but the point is, because we were flat and then we went sharp, it's almost like when we went sharp, it had more about it. You noticed it more because we went from flat to sharp. So this is what will happen just naturally, that reaction that you have to notes just being at slightly different intervals, it's going to set something off in your mind and your ear. You never listen to a vocal and think, oh, he was 5 cents flat there, but then after that he went 7 cents sharp. You're not doing those calculations in your head. All you're doing is listening to it, and you're having a reaction to it in your mind emotionally. That's how you equate what you're hearing, because music's a language and you don't see it like this, you just listen to it. So it's interesting that, we can see on the screen why we're getting a different feeling about different notes, because of the fact they're allowed to go where they want to and when they did, or where they did when it was performed. But we'll listen on to a little bit more.
But golden fields lie just before me, where God's redeemed shall ever sleep. I'm going home to see my mother and all my loved ones who've gone on. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home.
I love this really subtle vibrato as well that we get right at the end of the lines when we have this. There's a little wobble there, as we can see on the pitch monitoring software, but it's after these really consistently held notes. The other thing that I want to point out is the way that Jos, when he is singing through this, he's got no reference point, and his intervals are so accurate that even when he's, slightly sharp here and then goes flat, let me just move this forward a little bit, because we can see that again, flat here and then flat and flat. And as we keep on going forward, he's got this ability to almost reset and recalibrate himself to pitch. So when he comes down to the G3, he's now, exactly where he needs to be, and the A3 as well, and then just slightly sharper the B3, then coming back down to the G3, and he's still bang on in this whole vocal phrase. It's like he's had a little bit of variation pitch-wise, but he's still just flowing, and it just goes to show that he's got this appreciation of pitch where previously he might be, a little bit flat, a little bit sharp, but he's got an overall sense of pitch and where he should be. And this is something that you can say for all of the great singers that we've looked at on the channel in this kind of detail, that sometimes they will be sharp, sometimes they will be flat, but they have an overall sense of pitch, so that if they are just momentarily sharp or flat, they'll be, for the most part, bang on pitch, or at least they'll sound pitch perfect to the ear. Obviously, it doesn't happen unless it's being manipulated by software that you'll get directly over lines on 440 hertz tuning all the time. But this is the point, that great singers have this fundamental appreciation of pitch and where the notes should be. But thank you guys for requesting this performance and this video for me to take a look at. As always, keep those requests and suggestions coming in the comments section below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!